Imagine this secret city, built almost overnight, way out on this remote plateau, and it's gathering some of the most brilliant minds in the world for a mission. Well, a mission that would literally change everything.
And that wasn't science fiction. That was Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project.
Exactly. What's so gripping is when you start to peel back the layers of that secret world. You see the huge science, of course, but also the really human side of it all.
Yeah, the living and working there.
Yeah.
The isolation, the pressure, the day-to-day struggles, sometimes funny moments, and always the risks involved.
Right. So today, that's our deep dive. We're digging into what life and work were really like at Project Y Los Alamos, from that explosive start right through the immediate aftermath.
And we've got some incredible sources that really bring it to life. Personal stories, like one guy who got there by hitchhiking and hopping freight trains.
Seriously, a freight train?
Yeah. And then you have the stark historical records, too, including, well, a pretty surprising report on the long-term health of survivors from nuclear accidents there.
Okay, so our mission here is to unpack all that. The fascinating details, the surprising insights from these documents. We want to understand the people, the incredible science, the ingenuity, and, yeah, the dangers, all happening under this intense veil of secrecy.
Let's get into it. The place itself, Project Y, chosen specifically because it was so isolated up on the Pajarito Plateau.
They basically took over the old Los Alamos Ranch School, right? The buildings, the land.
Exactly. But just getting there,
Yeah.
that wasn't always simple, which tells you something right off the bat.
How so?
Well, Albert Bartlett, his story is in our sources. He described this journey. It sounds like something from another time. He came from Ohio, hitched rides, drove delivery trucks through Oklahoma City, hitched again to Amarillo.
Okay.
And then, get this, he hopped a freight train down to Belen, which is south of Albuquerque.
Wow, a freight train. Just to get close to Santa Fe for this secret project? That's commitment.
Or maybe just wartime reality, Anyway, he gets to Santa Fe, reports to that famous address, a 109 East Palace.
Dorothy McKibben's office. The gatekeeper.
That's the one. She handled the first bit of processing. Then it was onto a bus for this winding, scenic, but probably kind of nerve-wracking drive up the hill. Bartlett said he was just amazed by the New Mexico landscape.
So you arrive this isolated, maybe kind of rustic place. Bartlett mentioned a big wooden water tank, like a Western movie set.
Right.
And then, bam, housing. Because the number of people they needed just exploded, way beyond initial guesses.
Oh, absolutely. Oppenheimer first thought, maybe 100 people?
Something like that.
General Groves, the military head, he tripled it to 300. But the reality, once families started coming, thousands. By late 43, maybe 3,500 people. By the end of the war, closer to 10,000.
10,000 people descending on this tiny ranch school setup. How did they even house everyone?
It was a huge scramble. A logistical nightmare, basically. When Bartlett first got there wasn't room on the hill yet. So he and others were put up temporarily down the road at the lodge in Bandelier National Monument.
In Frijoles Canyon.
Yeah, down there. You see it a couple of weeks, spent his time hiking around the old Pueblo ruins, which is kind of surreal, right? Waiting to join a secret atom bomb project while exploring 1,000-year-old cliff dwellings.
Definitely surreal. So you're basically camping out in a national park, waiting for a dorm bed, like Dorm 132, or maybe space in the quickly built places like the Sun Departments or Morganville, McKeeville.
Right. Those areas popped up fast. And then, of course, there was the legendary Bathtub Row.
Yes. The prime real estate.
Totally. The original 6-log and stone cottages from the ranch school. The only places with bathtubs. Oppenheimer lived there, next door to Captain Parsons, the guy in charge of actually delivering the bombs. Compared to the barracks. Pure luxury.
And the secrecy just seeped into everything, didn't it? Like babies born there, their birth certificates just said P.O. Box 1663, Santa Fe.
Yeah. It shows how determined they were to keep the whole place, its purpose, completely off the map. Literally.
Okay, so you make the journey, you find somewhere to sleep, eventually. Then comes the moment you find out why you're really there. For Bartlett, it was his first science interview with Robert Batcher.
That must have been intense. Bartlett was anxious, wanted to know the goal, and Batcher, well, he didn't beat around the bush.
Just laid it out.
Pretty much. Building an atomic bomb. Using nuclear fission. He listed the big names there, the equipment, Van de Graaffs, cyclotrons, particle accelerators. Bartlett said it felt like hearing the index of a physics textbook read out loud. He was totally overwhelmed.
I can imagine. So after that mind bender, they sent him around to different groups to find fit.
Right. He ended up with Bob Thompson and Donald Swinehart, setting up and running a mass spectrometer. which was critical work, analyzing plutonium isotopes coming in from Hanford.
Plutonium isotopes. Okay, and this leads to something huge, right? This plutonium-240 problem.
Exactly. This is an amazing detail from the sources. There was this growing worry. Early measurements hinted that an isotope, Pu-240, mixed in with the needed Pu-239 would cause the bomb to pre-detonate. Basically, fizzle.
A dud. How did they figure that out with so little material early on?
Well, according to Bob Thompson's account, Emilio Segura's group took a tiny plutonium sample out to a remote site trying to cut down background radiation. They used an ionization chamber, looking for fission events. And the experiment gave them just 8 counts.
8. That's it. 8 detected events.
That was it. Thompson stressed how unbelievable it was. They had to make huge, fundamental changes to the whole bomb program based on the statistics of just those 8 counts. It's incredible. Shows the scientific insight and the stakes. Interpreting tiny bits of data.
Wow. 8 counts changed the course of the Manhattan Project. Because that Pu-240 risk meant the simpler gun design wouldn't work for plutonium.
Precisely. It slammed the door on that approach for plutonium and made the implosion design absolutely critical. People like Richard Tolman had suggested it, but then you get John von Neumann, the mathematician, and George Kistiakowsky, the explosives expert, really pushing it forward.
So the sources show that by mid-1944, Oppenheimer basically said, okay, implosion is the priority.
Yeah, a massive reorganization of the whole lab followed. Everything focused on making that incredibly complicated implosion design work. That became the Fat Man bomb.
Driven by just 8 counts. Wild. And meanwhile, you had other giants there, too. Edward Teller working on the super, the H-bomb concept.
Right, and Enrico Fermi heading his own division.
Yeah.
Just an insane concentration of brainpower.
But not everyone knew everything. Right. The badge system.
Yeah, the white badge, blue badge system. White badges were usually scientists, degree holders. They got into the classified meetings, the colloquia where Oppenheimer and others gave progress reports.
And blue badges were the essential support staff. Machinists, technicians, admin, janitors.
Exactly. Absolutely vital, but not officially read into the main mission. They didn't go to the big briefings, though. I mean, you can imagine.
They probably figured out a lot anywhere.
Oh, for sure. Just from context, the materials, overheard chatter, they just didn't have that formal access.
And beyond the physics and secrecy, there were some unique gear stories. Bartlett mentioned Bob Thompson knew mass spectrometers because he learned from Al Nye, a pioneer.
Right, and when Los Alamos needed one, the government just took one from the National Bureau of Standards and shipped it over, appropriated it.
Just like that. And then there was the reactor, the water boiler.
Oh yeah, the water boiler reactor at Omega site. This was only the 3rd nuclear reactor ever built in the world, after Chicago Pile 1 and the one at Oak Ridge.
3rd ever.
Wow. It used enriched uranium salt dissolved in water inside this stainless steel sphere, surrounded by beryllium bricks and neutron reflectors. But the source points out this tiny detail that was a huge headache: welding that sphere. Yeah, normal solder would corrode from the uranium salt. They had to invent new welding techniques right there on the spot. Just one example of the constant, unexpected engineering problems they had to solve. It went critical in May '44.
The 3rd reactor, built in a secret canyon, it just underscores the insane level of innovation happening everywhere. But, okay, life wasn't all physics and pressure cooker problems. People had to unwind.
Definitely. Bartlett talks about that. He loved hiking in the mountains around there, stunning scenery, and he actually volunteered for clearing trees.
Clearing trees for what?
To set up a ski hill at Sawyer's Hill.
A secret ski hill at the Atom Bomb Lab. You couldn't make this stuff up.
Right, and some great stories came out of it. And just daily life, too. Bartlett remembers hearing someone page Werner Heisenberg over the loudspeaker.
Like the famous German physicist? A joke.
Presumably just a little inside joke,
Yeah.
Right in the middle of everything. But the ski hill, that was a hub.
Apparently Kistiakowsky, the explosives guy, was a serious skier.
Oh yeah. Pushed hard for a rope tow, got volunteers like Bartlett out clearing the slopes, and Enrico Fermi was always there.
Fermi skiing.
Yep. Bartlett tells this funny story about Fermi making some point on a whiteboard about the ski hill, and everyone, including Fermi, just cracking up when he realized he'd forgotten to put any numbers on the board. And he described Fermi as this distinctive skier, super fast, skied in this really low crouch.
Amazing. But the most famous ski hill story involves Niels Bohr, right?
Oh, that picture. It's everywhere. Bohr's visiting one Sunday, the rope tow's acting up, people are waiting around.
And Bohr just
grabs his poles and starts pulling himself all the way up the hill. Quiet determination. Just gets on with it. Kind of sums him up, doesn't it? Pragmatic genius.
Nobel laureates pulling up a hill cleared by bomb scientists. What a place. And there was social life too, right? Dorm parties?
Yes, and this leads to a really awful, tragic story from the sources. The punch at these parties. The base was ethyl alcohol from the lab stock.
Lab alcohol? Was that allowed?
Probably not officially, but it sounds like it was kind of a known thing. But then something went terribly wrong.
What happened?
Some custodial staff, who maybe didn't know the difference, took ethylene glycol instead. Also from lab supplies, but highly toxic. Antifreeze, basically. They thought it was the drinkable stuff for their own punch. 3 of them died.
Oh my God. That's horrible.
It's just, yeah, a grim reminder of the dangers just lurking around in that environment, even away from the nuclear stuff, and the consequences of maybe loose controls or simple mistakes.
Heartbreaking. Just a tragic accident. It makes the next detail about lab supplies seem almost absurd by comparison. Kleenex.
Kleenex tissues. Stocked in the labs for cleaning delicate equipment, right?
Yeah.
But everyone figured out they were handy for, well, everything else.
So personal use went way up.
Through the roof. So high they had to make a rule. You needed a group leader signature to get Kleenex from the stockroom.
A signature for Kleenex. It's small, but it says so much about the control, the rationing, the weirdness of life there. And communication was locked down too, right? No phones in houses?
None. Security reasons. Everything through switchboards. Started with one Forest Service line, then Army lines, but still no direct calls home. Eventually, the call volume got so huge they needed WAC's Women's Army Corps members staffing the switchboard 24/7.
Okay, so we've got the wild journey, the intense secret science, the strange daily life, the fun, the tragedy. The project leads to the bombs used on Japan, but work didn't just stop there in August 45.
No, we kept going, supporting things like Operation Crossroads in 46, those atomic tests at Bikini Atoll, testing bombs on ships.
And Albert Bartlett was involved in that?
He was, part of the team setting up cameras on towers to film the blasts. One 75-foot tower right on Bikini Island, another on Enu Island, documenting the effects.
He saw that first test, ABLE, happen.
He did, from a ship maybe 20 miles out. Said his instructions were turn away, wait for the flash. When he looked back, this huge growing hemisphere of fog, turning bright orange, then it just evaporated and up went that massive column of smoke and debris, the mushroom cloud.
Chilling. And he went on to the target ships afterward.
Yeah, part of the inspection teams. His descriptions are pretty intense. The aircraft carrier Independence, its whole island superstructure just gone, sheared off, a submarine superstructure blown away.
Oh, wow.
On the cruiser Salt Lake City, the wooden decks were charred black.
Yeah.
But below deck, he saw these 12-inch thick steel I-beams bent down a foot or two by the blast force.
12-inch steel beams. Bent. That's hard to even picture. The power.
Makes it terrifyingly real, doesn't it? He also mentioned standing on the deck of the Japanese battleship Nagato, Yamamoto's old flagship, seeing this powerful symbol, now just a target, that moved him.
After Crossroads, Los Alamos changed, right? Fewer people.
Yeah, numbers dropped a lot. The lab kept working supporting tests like Crossroads, but it began shifting. From purely military to more civilian control, eventually under new management.
But the scientists themselves felt a responsibility, didn't they, after the war?
Many did. A deep responsibility. The sources talk about their efforts to educate the public, influence policy. They put together an educational booklet, lobbied hard for the McMahon Bill.
That set up the Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC.
Exactly, civilian control over nuclear stuff. And Robert Batcher, the guy who interviewed Bartlett way back when, he became one of the first AEC commissioners.
And Bartlett, he left Los Alamos?
Went to grad school. But those experiences, the Southwest landscape, it stuck with him. He kept hiking, saw Fermi again, actually after the war, at the Intertribal Indian Ceremonial in Gallup, New Mexico.
Fermi just enjoying the festival.
Apparently so. Seeing Fermi there, Bartlett said, just reinforced his own desire to get a job back in the Rockies someday, which he eventually did. Shows how those personal paths were shaped by that time on the Hill.
Now, the main goal was the bombs, but the work itself. Handling that material was incredibly dangerous. And tragically, after the war, there were 2 really serious accidents at Los Alamos. Criticality accidents.
Yes, the sources go into these. They happened during experiments with critical assemblies. Trying to understand exactly how plutonium behaves, fission-wise, by bringing pieces just to the edge of criticality, where the chain reaction starts sustaining itself.
It was nicknamed tickling the dragon's tail, wasn't it? Because it was so dangerous.
That's right. The first one, LA-1, was August 21st, 1945, just after the war ended.
What happened there?
It involved a physicist operator and a military guard. Late at night, stacking tungsten carbide bricks around a sphere of plutonium, reflecting neutrons back into it. During an unscheduled run, a brick slipped, fell onto the assembly.
Oh no!
And tragically, the operator stayed right there, trying to pull the brick off, dismantle it quickly.
What happened instantly?
The assembly went prompt critical, which is way beyond just critical. It's an uncontrolled, lightning-fast chain reaction, a huge burst of radiation instantly. Both the operator and the guard saw this distinct blue glow in the dark lab.
The blue glow, that's the radiation ionizing the air.
Exactly. A visible sign of the intense radiation burst. The operator felt immediate numbness tingling in his hands.
And the second accident, LA2, May 21st, 1946.
That was probably more famous, sadly. Involved physicist Louis Slotin. He was demonstrating the technique to his successor. Using 2 hemispheres of beryllium around a plutonium core, holding the top shell with his thumb, separating them with just a screwdriver.
A screwdriver? That sounds precarious.
Extremely. And the source says the screwdriver slipped. The top shell dropped and closed the core completely.
Prompt critical again.
Instantly. Another massive radiation burst. And even though the room was brightly lit by sunlight this time, people there still saw that blue flash.
And the operators, the physicists in LA1 and Slotin in LA2, they died very quickly.
Within weeks, yes. From acute radiation syndrome, the body just overwhelmed by that massive dose.
But there were other people in the rooms during both accidents who survived the initial blast.
That's right. And that's where this follow-up study in our sources becomes so incredibly important. It tracks those survivors.
It gives this rare long-term look, right? Because these medical histories weren't usually published.
Exactly. A vital piece of data. Though the report itself is careful, cautions about drawing definite conclusions from such a small, unique group. Other factors, like genetics, could play a role, but it tracks the effects of that radiation, mostly neutrons and gamma rays from the burst, plus radiation from that blue glow.
So what did they find? Case 2, the guard from the first accident, LA1?
He survived the immediate effects, lived for 33 more years, but he died of acute myelogenous leukemia. Interestingly, the report notes his brother also died of leukemia, one of those complicating factors.
Okay. Case 4, the person Slotin was training in LA2. He got the highest dose among the survivors in that one.
Right. He recovered from the acute symptoms too, went on with his career, but died 20 years later, age 54, fatal heart attack. The autopsy showed severe arteriosclerosis hardening of the arteries, and also atrophied thyroid and testes. The report discusses whether radiation damage to the thyroid might have contributed to the heart problems later on.
What about case 6? A technician in LA2 got a fair dose but didn't have acute symptoms.
Yeah, he's a remarkable case. Reportedly, he was back doing 20-mile weekend hikes within 2 weeks of the accident.
Wow.
Lived for 27 years after. Later developed severe anemia, congestive heart failure. The report mentions some unusual blood analysis findings, too.
Some of the others from LA2?
Well, case 8 died 18 years later. Fatal acute myelocytic leukemia. Case 9 died 16 years later. Also fatal acute myelocytic leukemia.
So multiple leukemia cases among the survivors.
Yes. And the report points out, look, radiation, especially neutrons, is known to increase leukemia risk. It's tempting to link these directly, but again, they stress the difficulty of absolute proof in this small group.
Any others mentioned?
Case 7 died in the Korean War, unrelated. Case 5 died of bacterial endocarditis. Case 10 was reportedly healthy at age 55, and the report came out in 1978. So it's a complex picture. But that cluster of leukemias, the potential thyroid and heart links, it certainly highlights the serious long-term risks.
Yeah. Even if you survive the initial blast, the potential long-term consequences were clearly very real and very serious. The report underscores that, even with the caveats.
Absolutely. It's a stark look at the aftermath, beyond the immediate fatalities.
Okay, amidst all this high-stakes science and, frankly, terrifying risk, the sources also bring out some incredibly unique characters, people who contributed in totally unconventional ways.
Oh yeah, like Dwight Smith Young. His story, it reads like something else. He was a carpenter. And a photographer apparently photographed the aftermath of the huge 1915 Galveston hurricane, even took WWI pilot training. But no college degree in science.
A carpenter and photographer ends up at the metallurgical lab in Chicago, which was part of the Manhattan Project. How?
The source says he basically just showed up at the University of Chicago in '42, curious about what they were doing, and even though he had no formal science training, they gave him an on-the-spot PhD oral exam.
Wait, a PhD oral exam? For a job?
Apparently. And he must have impressed them because they hired him as a technician.
That's maybe the craziest job interview story I've ever heard. And he eventually got promoted to full staff member at Los Alamos years later, 1953. Still no degree.
Still no degree.
Yeah.
And get this, he was in the room during the Slotin accident at LA2. Very close, the third closest person. Ran out, but then went back in to check on people. And despite being so close, he had radiation tests for the rest of his life. Always negative, which is just baffling.
Negative, wow. But his most famous story might be Little Eva.
Little Eva, yes. So 1951, he needs a small neutron source for some research he's doing at the lab. He asks the engineers, and they tell him, nope, can't build a reactor that small, impossible.
So what does he do?
He designs one himself and builds it with a machinist for about $1,200.
$1,200 for a working nuclear reactor, designed and built by the carpenter photographer.
You got it. And he named it Little Eva after a character in Uncle Tom's Cabin. And it worked. Became a really useful neutron source for the lab for years. And later, it became the very first reactor to go critical in the state of Nevada.
That's incredible. Just pure ingenuity and maybe a little bit of stubbornness.
Totally. Just doing it when told it couldn't be done. And he was unconventional outside the lab, too. Did independent archaeology work, excavated ruins, studied pictographs, dendrochronology, tree ring dating.
What a character. A real Renaissance man of the atomic age. And his nickname, the Hermit of Pajarito Canyon.
Yeah, because after the war, for several years, he actually lived in an old log cabin right there on the Los Alamos site.
A hermit living on the site of the secret lab. You really couldn't make this stuff up. Okay, so as we start to wrap this deep dive up, Richard Malenfant, in that Nuclear Museum interview source, he makes a really important point about preserving this history.
He does. He talks about how physical places get lost, like the thermal diffusion building at Oak Ridge being torn down. When those places go, you lose a tangible link to the past, to the work that happened there.
And he sees continued relevance for the lessons learned, right?
Yeah.
Especially for future nuclear tech.
Yeah, he mentions possibilities like nuclear rocket propulsion for Mars missions or power for a moon base where solar might be tricky. His view is that nuclear tech is incredibly safe when you handle it with extreme care.
A point really driven home by the history itself, especially those accident reports we discussed.
Absolutely. Malenfant also shares some personal connections.
Yeah.
His daughter used to use GID Malenfant glow-in-the-dark as her return address joke.
Mm-hmm.
His son worked at the lab for a bit.
Shows how the lab becomes part of the family identity, almost.
Yeah, and he notes how many kids who grew up there feel drawn back to work at Los Alamos as adults. And he throws in this interesting personal anecdote. His old poker group for the Pajarito site, where the really high-risk critical assembly stuff happened.
Yeah.
He says they all lived well past the average life expectancy. He admits it's just an anecdote, not science, but still an interesting counterpoint to some of the concerns.
An intriguing observation for sure, especially right after discussing the survivor study details. This whole deep dive, it's been quite a ride, following threads from, cross-country hitchhiking and fights over Kleenex.
Right, through world-changing science, inventing new tech on the fly.
To those tragic accidents and the long, complex story of the survivors and these absolutely unique individuals like Dwight Young.
It paints this picture, doesn't it? A place where just unbelievable scientific ambition crashed headlong into immense human pressure and inherent, sometimes devastating risk. It shows that even in this secret world focused on physics and engineering, the human experience was messy, surprising, and ultimately profoundly important.
So as you, the listener, think about all this, what does it really mean to build something that can change the world so completely under that kind of pressure, that kind of secrecy? What are the full consequences long term? Both the big global impact they aimed for and the unintended personal costs for the people inside that secret world. How do we weigh that? The scientific leap against the human price and the absolute need to handle powerful knowledge with just incredible care.